Sweat prickled under stiff collars in Atlanta's packed courtroom as Jamal Carter, a black man in a sharp navy suit, stood before the judge. The prosecution smirked. The gallery whispered the verdict seemed inevitable. Then Jamal spoke calm, clear, and the room froze. "I am Special Agent Jamal Carter, Department of Justice." Gasps, rippled faces, blanched. Power shifted in a single heartbeat. What secret had been hidden in plain sight, and how would it shatter everything they thought they controlled? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe truth always finds its voice, hit like and subscribe. The sun had just begun to sink behind Atlanta's glass towers, casting long shadows across the upscale streets of Buckhead. Evening rush hummed around luxury boutiques and corner cafes, the sidewalks pulsing with polished shoes and designer handbags. Jamal Carter navigated it all with quiet ease, his navy suit crisp, his stride unhurried, and his calm presence commanding attention without asking for it. He was 39, a tall, broad-shouldered black man with close-cropped hair, deep brown eyes, and the kind of deliberate stillness that unsettled people used to noise. To strangers, he might have looked like an executive heading home from a late board meeting or a litigator reviewing a case in his head. To Sergeant Karen Delacroix, he looked like a target. Parked just behind a row of high-end storefronts, Delacroix sat in her cruiser with one elbow resting out the window. Her buzz-cut blonde hair gleamed under the amber glow of a street lamp, and her eyes, hazel narrow, unblinking, tracked Jamal like a hawk. She didn't know his name, didn't care. All she saw was a black man in a suit. She thought he hadn't earned walking like he belonged in a world she didn't want him in. As Jamal slowed at a stoplight, she rolled forward, flicked on her headlights, and pulled alongside him. Her voice crackled through the twilight air, hard and sharp like snapped glass. "Got a broken tail light." "Sir." Jamal turned his head slowly. Calm eyes met hers through the open window. "I just had it serviced last week," he replied, his voice low and respectful but unmistakably firm. "Are you sure that's what this is? That tone, that composure, that refusal to stammer or shrink?" It made something tighten in her chest, rage masked as authority. "Step out of the vehicle," she snapped, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Her boots thudded against the pavement as she approached his car, one hand resting on the grip of her holstered baton. Jamal sighed long and slow, as if he'd done this 100 times before. Because he had. Since he was 16, walking home from school in the wrong neighborhood. Since college, since grad school, since the day he realized that no amount of education or etiquette could shield him from someone like her. Still, he complied. Slowly, deliberately, he opened the door and stepped out. "Can I ask what this is about?" "Officer," he said, keeping both hands visible. No sudden movements. Delacroix squared her shoulders, standing tall on her tiptoes to match his height. "High crime area," she said, driving slow, looking like you don't belong. The lie was clumsy. Buckhead wasn't a high crime area. It was where senators dined and billionaires slept, but lies don't have to be smart when the badge lets them stick. "I live 5 miles from here," Jamal said, handing her his ID. She snatched it, didn't even glance at the name, just tossed it onto the hood of her cruiser. "Sure you do," she sneered. The crowd started gathering, tourists with shopping bags, teens with phones already recording. A few whispers, a few smirks, just enough noise to turn power into performance. "Hands on the car," she ordered. "I've done nothing wrong," he said, eyes steady. Now Jamal turned and placed his palms flat on the cool metal of his sedan. She twisted his arm hard behind his back and slapped the cuffs on with a clatter. "You're resisting, I'm not." But it didn't matter. She shoved him against the car anyway, hard enough to bruise phones recorded every second. Her voice rang out for the audience. Suspicious behavior. Possible burglary. Suspect. It was nonsense. But she wasn't trying to be right. She was trying to be loud. As she dragged him toward the cruiser, he met her gaze in the rearview mirror. Calm, controlled, unbroken. And for the first time, she felt a sliver of unease, because something in his silence told her this wasn't over, not even close. 3 days had passed since Jamal Carter was cuffed against the hood of his own car on a quiet evening in Buckhead. The bruises had bloomed across his wrists and ribs like badges he never asked for. But bruises fade. Proof doesn't. In the early hours of Saturday morning, while the city slept under gray skies and scattered rain, Jamal sat at his kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside him. Across from him, his laptop glowed in the dim light, the cursor hovering over a single file. Dashcam, audio, final move. He'd watched it a dozen times. The flashing lights, The calm tone in his voice, the aggression in hers. Sergeant Karen Delacroix barking orders, twisting his arm, slamming him against the car. The footage didn't need commentary. It told the story in full color and sharp angles. His restraint, her cruelty, their silence. He clicked upload. By noon, the video had gone viral. Within hours, the footage swept through social media like wildfire, retweeted, stitched, reshared by journalists, influencers, activists, and ordinary people who saw too much of themselves in his calm voice and clenched jaw. The hashtags were swift and unified. Had justice for Jamal, not resisting. She knew his name. Local news anchors replayed the video on loop. Sergeant Delacroix accused of excessive force during questionable traffic stop in Buckhead. One report led, "Community demands immediate action." By sunset, the Atlanta Police Department had no choice but to issue a statement. The mayor's office called for a review. Delacroix was placed on administrative leave indefinitely. To many, it looked like a win, but not to Delacroix. She sat in her apartment that night staring at the TV screen, her own face frozen in a paused news segment. Suspended glared across the chyron like a scarlet letter. Her fists clenched, her breath shallow. Jamal Carter had made her a villain. He'd flipped the script, and she wasn't going to let him write the ending. She picked up her phone and made a call she hadn't made in over a year. Slater, a gravelly voice, answered. "It's Karen," she said. "I need a favor." A pause. Then a chuckle. "How messy?" "Quiet," she replied. But permanent Deputy Chief Raymond Slater was old-school Atlanta PD, the kind of cop who believed loyalty mattered more than truth, and that power was a tool best used in the shadows. He owed Delacroix back from a time when she'd looked the other way on one of his less-than-clean arrests. "You get the piece?" he asked. Delacroix nodded her hand, brushing against the small black Glock on her kitchen counter, a weapon pulled from an old evidence locker wiped clean. "I've got it." The next night, under the cover of darkness, she drove past Jamal's house. His car sat parked in the driveway untouched since the night she'd arrested him. She slipped on latex gloves, eased the trunk open, and tucked the gun beneath the spare tire like a snake coiled in waiting. Then she made the call. An anonymous tip. A burner phone. A fake voice. "There's a man on Peachwood Avenue, armed, dangerous, black sedan. License plate starts with JRZ. You might want to move fast." The next morning, Jamal stepped outside to grab the paper, still groggy, still unaware. The sirens came first, then the cars. 3 patrol units screeched into his driveway. Officers spilled out with weapons drawn, barking commands. "Hands where we can see them." Jamal's heart pounded. "What is this?" I step away from the vehicle. Now they popped the trunk. One officer reached inside and pulled out the gun like it was the smoking end of a story they'd already written. "Got it," he shouted. Carter, another officer, said coldly, "You're under arrest. Illegal possession," as they cuffed him for the second time in less than a week. Jamal caught his own reflection in the cruiser window. Shoulders tense, jaw locked, suit wrinkled from sleep. It was the same image Delacroix had seen, but this time his eyes didn't burn with fear. They burned with clarity, because he knew she was scared now, and scared people make mistakes. The steel door clanged shut behind him with a finality that echoed through his bones. Jamal Carter sat in a holding cell, his hands cuffed once more. His navy suit rumpled, his breath steady but cold. He'd just spent the last 24 hours accused again. This time, not of resisting, not of being aggressive, but of something worse. Gun possession. The planted weapon. The anonymous tip. The swift arrest at dawn. He didn't have to guess who orchestrated it. Every step had the signature arrogance of Sergeant Karen Delacroix written in bold. But she wasn't working alone now. No Deputy Chief Raymond Slater had joined the game, pulling rank and tightening the noose. Across town, Talia, Jamal's wife of 6 years, stood frozen in their kitchen phone pressed to her ear, a cold wave of disbelief crashing through her chest. The morning had started with coffee and promise. Now it was headlines. Man from viral arrest, charged with illegal firearm possession. She dropped her phone. Her knees buckled before her voice did. Humiliation surged again. Cameras outside their home, neighbors whispering, her students' parents messaging her school. Not even the church board knew how to respond. That night, Talia visited the precinct. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to the cold glass separating her from Jamal. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered. "It's not," he replied quietly. "It never was." And that was the moment Desiree Miles re-entered the picture, a towering presence in the Atlanta legal world. Desiree wasn't just a defense attorney. She was a storm in high heels and a law degree. Sharp, fearless, and known for taking on cases no one else would touch. When she saw the dashcam footage, she called Jamal's family before they could reach her. Within hours, she was in the courtroom. Within days, she was tearing apart the state's case. "There are no prints on the weapon," she snapped in court. "No DNA, no witnesses, just a tip. That's not evidence. That's a trap." She demanded security footage from the street that showed Delacroix passing Jamal's car the night before. When the footage mysteriously malfunctioned, Desiree pounced. Funny how systems break when justice is about to catch up. The judge reluctantly relented, charges dismissed again. Jamal walked out of the courthouse into a crowd of reporters holding Talia's hand tight. This time he didn't speak. This time he just looked into every camera lens, like it was a warning. "We're not afraid." For a moment it seemed like they were in the clear, but Delacroix and Slater weren't out of moves. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to destroy. The next morning it hit news stations lit up with a story titled "Who Really Is Jamal Carter?" And below it, a digital rap sheet, assault, drug possession, theft, resisting arrest charges that didn't exist. Records that weren't real. But to the public eye, it looked like the truth. It looked like confirmation. And that was the point. Talia gasped as the anchor read out the fabricated list with a smirk. "This can't be happening," she murmured. Jamal didn't flinch. He didn't cry out, but his jaw clenched and his shoulders tensed. The attack had changed form. No longer cuffs or cold cells. This was character assassination, a smear campaign engineered to bury him under perception. Desiree called it instantly. "This is Slater's move," she growled. "They forged a record. We'll expose it, but it won't be clean. People remember headlines, not retractions." And Jamal nodded, the fire in his eyes undimmed. "They want me broken," he said. "They're not ready for what comes next." Saturday morning in Atlanta bloomed with possibility. The sun broke through low clouds, painting a soft glow over Centennial Park, where signs waved, cameras blinked, and voices rose in unison, not in protest, but in power. At the center of it all stood Riley Mason, founder of Justice Rising, her fiery voice amplified by a portable mic. "This isn't just about Jamal Carter," she declared, pointing to the crowd. "It's about every black man silenced, smeared, and shackled while the real criminals wear badges." The roar that followed was electric. Jamal stood off to the side, surrounded by supporters. His hands were clasped in front of him, his expression calm but resolute. Talia stood beside him, her fingers laced tightly through his. Attorney Desiree Miles was not far, watching the edges of the crowd like a hawk in heels. Everything for a brief moment felt as though it might actually tip in their favor. They had come with signs, shirts, hope, but someone else had come with a plan. Unbeknownst to the crowd, Reggie Ward, a wiry ex-con with prison tattoos and a cheap pistol, stood crouched behind a row of folding chairs near the west entrance. He wasn't there for justice. He was there for chaos, and he'd been paid to deliver it. His trigger finger twitched. He raised the gun to the sky. Pop, 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 3 shots ripped through the air like a zipper unfastening piece. The effect was immediate. Screams, stumbling, stampeding. People dropped their signs and their sense of direction. Children cried. Elderly men were pushed to the ground. A woman tripped over a barricade and screamed for help as the crowd splintered into panic. Riley's mic cut off. Volunteers rushed to pull people towards safety, but it was too late. Dozens were injured. Some trampled, others bleeding. And in the midst of it, Jamal Carter stood frozen. Not from fear, but recognition. He saw Reggie, the same man who had once worked security for Slater's nephew. Their eyes locked for a split second before Reggie vanished into the chaos, slipping away like smoke. By the time the police arrived, led by none other than Sergeant Karen Delacroix, the story was already written. Guns drawn. She approached Jamal like she'd been waiting all her life for this scene. "Down, hands where I can see them." Jamal slowly raised his arms, his expression unreadable. Talia screamed, "He didn't do anything." Delacroix shoved her aside. Deputy Chief Raymond Slater arrived minutes later, stepping out of his cruiser with the practiced calm of a man who never worried about consequences. He surveyed the scene, nodded once at Delacroix, and turned to the press just arriving at the barricades. "We are now treating this as an act of incited violence," he announced. His voice measured his words. "Deliberate. Mr. Carter encouraged this riot. He will be held accountable. No trial, no evidence, just a script." Jamal's wrists were bound again, the cuffs biting harder this time. As he was led past Riley, who stood dazed and bloodied near the stage, she locked eyes with him and whispered, "This isn't over. They'll regret this." He nodded, silent as always, but behind his quiet was a storm. The headlines that night screamed the lie louder than truth ever could. Carter rally turns violent. Gunshots in crowd. Activist or instigator? Delacroix grinned at the monitor from her precinct desk. Told you third time's the charm. Slater lit a cigar beside her, eyes fixed on the screen. Let him fight ghosts. We just rewrote the story, but they didn't realize Jamal had already begun collecting his own truths. And this time he wasn't playing defense. Courtroom 3B buzzed with murmurs, cameras and tension thick as Georgia heat. The trial of Jamal Carter had become more than a criminal case. It was a national spectacle. One man's freedom dangled beneath a web of lies spun by a system with everything to lose. Jamal sat at the defense table, jaw set, his hands folded loosely over his lap. Beside him, attorney Desiree Miles shuffled her notes, her lipstick immaculate, her voice always calm even when the stakes weren't. The prosecution opened with their favorite tool out. Assistant District Attorney Lindsay McGraw, a woman with a polished ponytail and a cold fire in her eyes, marched to the front. "We will show." She declared that Mr. Carter not only incited a riot but sought to manipulate evidence and pervert the course of justice. The gallery murmured. Desiree leaned toward Jamal. "They're reaching. But this next part, it's meant to shake you." The first witness officer, Darnell Hughes, walked in slowly, his badge glinting under the fluorescence. He avoided Jamal's eyes. Hughes had once been a quiet, reliable beat cop, a man who'd spoken to Desiree privately after Jamal's second arrest, saying things didn't feel right. But today he walked differently, heavier, like someone who had been backed into a corner and forced to choose survival over truth. Sworn in, he adjusted the mic and cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter offered me money," he said. "Told me to say the planted gun wasn't his, said he'd make it worth my while." A gasp rippled across the courtroom. Jamal blinked. "That's a lie," he muttered. "Judge Allison." Graves, stern and tight-lipped, rapped her gavel gently. "The defendant will remain silent." Desiree stood her heels, clicking like punctuation. "Officer Hughes," she said, voice velvet but lined with steel. "Do you have any recordings of this alleged bribe? Any texts? Emails?" Hughes looked down. "No, ma'am. Any witnesses?" He hesitated. "No." "Then tell me, when exactly did this happen?" 2 days after the second arrest." Desiree tilted her head. "Interesting. Because Mr. Carter was under house arrest. Then GPS confirms he never left his home." The gallery stirred again. Even Judge Graves arched a brow. But the prosecution was quick to pivot. "We concede the timeline may be imperfect," McGraw said coolly. "But the integrity of our witness is not in question." Desiree's voice was sharper now. "Not in question. Or simply protected." She turned to the jury. "You're being asked to believe a man with no proof, no support, and no consistent timeline over a defendant who has been assaulted, framed, and falsely accused in 3 separate incidents." The jury was listening, especially juror number 7, a woman in her late 40s with sharp glasses and sharper instincts. She scribbled something on her notepad. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Then came the moment Desiree had been waiting for. "Your Honor," she said, "we move to introduce body cam footage from Sergeant Delacroix's initial arrest of Mr. Carter." Graves nodded. "Proceed." The screen lit up. Delacroix's barked commands echoed through the speakers. Hands on the car. Jamal complied. Calm, respectful. The footage showed no resistance, no threat, just a man trying to survive. In one clip, Delacroix's voice muttered low, smug. "We'll teach this one how it works." Gasps juror number 7, paused mid-scribble. Graves leaned back. Assault charge is dismissed. 1 down. But Jamal's face didn't soften, because even as one lie unraveled, another tightened its grip. Darnell Hughes sat slumped now, the weight of his testimony written across his face, and yet McGraw clung to the damage it had already done. The truth had landed, but so had the seed of suspicion, and with more witnesses to come, the battle for belief had only just begun. The morning after the courtroom breakthrough should have been a reprieve, a moment of breath. But in Atlanta, mercy was a luxury Jamal Carter could no longer afford. The assault charge had been dropped, the dash cam footage had played, and for a few hours the tide had seemed to shift. Even some reporters outside the courthouse whispered, maybe he's not the monster they made him out to be. But Sergeant Karen Delacroix didn't lose well, and she certainly didn't forget. While Jamal prepared for court, Talia, his wife, walked into Peachtree Montessori, the small daycare where she'd worked for 5 years, to find her name on the news. Not for heroism or dignity, but for being married to a menace. An anonymous account created just days before had posted the school's address alongside photos of Talia holding hands with Jamal. The caption, "Your children are not safe. This is where the wife of a criminal works." By noon, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Threats, slurs, demands for her firing. By 3:00 p.m. Talia was escorted out by the director, tearful but firm. "I'm sorry, but we're shutting down until further notice. We can't protect you or the children." The damage didn't stop there. At home that evening, Talia walked into the kitchen and collapsed into Jamal's arms. "They came after me," she whispered, her voice broken. "They made me the target." Outside it was worse. Spray paint in red letters across the garage door. "Traitor!" Broken glass littered their porch, a dead raccoon dumped in their yard, a brick wrapped in newspaper inside a screenshot of Delacroix's mugshot with the words, "You made her a victim." Neighbors who had once waved now closed their blinds. The same platform that had once rallied with hashtags and donation links was silent. Justice Rising posted a vague message about stepping back for safety. One donor DM'd, "We can't afford the blowback. Good luck." The warmth that had once surrounded them was gone, replaced by cold silence and closed doors. But the hammer hadn't dropped yet. That came 2 nights later. Jamal stepped out to retrieve his phone charger from his car. The summer night was sticky and quiet, save for the chirp of insects and the far-off growl of engines. Then came the roar. 6 motorcycles, their headlights blinding, turned onto his street like a pack of wolves. At the front rode Duke Collier, a former enforcer with prison ink and a scar slicing his jaw. "That's him!" someone shouted. Jamal turned, hands up. "Wait, what is this?" No one listened. They came with pipes, chains, and fists. He barely dodged the first swing, but a second caught him in the ribs. Another cracked his forearm as he tried to shield his head. He fell to the pavement. Breath knocked out of him, the sound of boots and jeers surrounding him. From a block away, someone called the police, but they didn't come for the attackers. They came for Jamal. Deputy Chief Raymond Slater arrived minutes later. Behind the smirk on his face was the knowledge that this attack was no accident. He'd printed and passed out the wanted flyers earlier that week. Flyers branding Jamal as armed, dangerous, and a fugitive. No warrant, no facts, just fear. As medics tended to Jamal's bruised ribs, Slater gave the order, "Public disturbance, cuff him." And they did, in handcuffs, blood trickling from his temple. Jamal looked to the crowd gathering in the shadows. No cheers, no phones, just whispers. He brought it on himself. He's a thug. He provoked it. Talia watched from the porch, her hands trembling, her voice swallowed by the wind. They had taken her job, their safety. Now they were taking his name again, and no one seemed to care. 3 nights after Jamal Carter's arrest at the hands of a biker mob he never summoned, Atlanta was still humming with the residue of violence. The bruises on his face had darkened into deep purple blooms. His wrist, fractured during the scuffle, was now wrapped in gauze, but his spirit, though bloodied, was far from broken. Inside the modest brick home on Maple Street, Talia sat in silence, her fingers curled tightly around a chipped coffee mug, staring blankly at the front window, now boarded shut. They hadn't replaced the glass yet. Some wounds weren't meant to be hidden. But across town, in a dimly lit office lined with case files and empty energy drink cans, Attorney Desiree Miles was still working, tirelessly, furiously. She had seen this playbook before. The arrests, the planted weapon, the media-hit jobs, the orchestrated chaos disguised as spontaneous breakdowns. But she hadn't had proof. Until now. A midnight email landed in her inbox with a subject line that read, "You don't know me, but I have something you need." Attached was a single audio file marked only by a date, 07/11/24 MP3. It was Officer Darnell Hughes, not the version they'd seen in court, the one who'd cracked under pressure and testified falsely. This was him in a quieter moment, speaking candidly into his phone in the privacy of his patrol car. The fear was evident in his voice, but so was something else, conscience. They're setting him up. Slater and Delacroix. I heard them talking in the garage after the first arrest. She said, "He thinks he's smart, Let's bury him in paperwork and bullets." Slater laughed. Said he had the media on a leash and a folder full of fake priors. I didn't know what to do. But now, I have to say something. Desiree's breath caught. She called her paralegal, then the DA's office, then the judge's emergency line. By dawn, the courthouse was stirring. Within hours, Judge Arturo Levin, a seasoned jurist known for his meticulous temperament, convened an emergency hearing. The courtroom was half full, but the energy was electric. A few familiar faces from the press had returned, drawn not by spectacle this time, but by rumor that the case against Jamal Carter might be collapsing. Talia sat in the front row, her posture rigid, her fingers trembling as she watched her husband walk into the courtroom still wearing a jail-issued sweatshirt, but with his head held high. Desiree stood voice clear and clipped. "Your Honor, we have audio evidence directly linking Sergeant Karen Delacroix and Deputy Chief Raymond Slater to an unlawful conspiracy to frame my client, Mr. Carter. This evidence was recorded by a fellow officer and corroborates multiple irregularities we've previously raised." She played the file. The room fell into a heavy, stunned silence as Slater's voice echoed through the speakers, cold and casual. "Let the mob soften him up. By the time he gets to court, he won't even know which way is up." Gasps followed. The judge raised a hand for quiet, his jaw clenched. Effective immediately, he announced, "Mr. Jamal Carter is released on his own recognizance pending retrial. This court finds the new evidence credible and deeply concerning." Talia's face collapsed into tears. She stood as Jamal turned toward her, and for the first time in weeks they embraced without cuffs or guards between them. Then came the next gavel blow. As for Sergeant Delacroix, Judge Levin continued, "She is suspended without pay, pending internal review. A federal inquiry will be opened into Deputy Chief Slater's conduct. I will not allow this courtroom or this city to become a playground for personal vendettas cloaked in the law." It wasn't the end, but for the first time, justice didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like momentum. And in Jamal's eyes, still bruised, still tired, that momentum gleamed like the first light breaking after a storm. The courthouse buzzed with cautious hope after Jamal's release. His supporters gathered outside, cheering beneath the southern sun signs lifted high with words like, "Truth wins" and "Free Jamal Carter." Even the air felt different, lighter, charged with the kind of momentum people pray for when justice seems too far gone. Inside a modest office near the courthouse steps, Attorney Desiree Miles packed up the digital copy of Officer Darnell Hughes's recording onto 3 different encrypted drives. "We're not losing this," she told her assistant. Not this time. But she hadn't counted on Raymond Slater. The deputy chief had spent 2 decades learning how to keep his hands clean while everyone else bled, and now backed into a corner with his power unraveling, he went hunting. It didn't take him long. A careless clerk, a misfiled audio device. One copy, the original, still logged in the evidence room of the 9th Precinct under a generic entry, unlabeled recording, Hughes' locker. Slater's badge granted him entry. His name, still untainted by official reprimand, opened doors. And that night, under the flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb, he stood alone in the evidence room, holding the small digital recorder in a gloved hand. "You should have stayed scared, Hughes." He took a breath, poured a stream of accelerant over the carpet and lit the match. The flames ate fast. Paper-plastic truth. By the time the fire alarm blared and the sprinklers kicked in, the damage was done. The next morning, Desiree arrived at the courthouse early, expecting to meet with the judge's clerk to schedule the evidentiary hearing. Instead, she was met by Judge Levin himself, his expression colder than the marble floor they stood on. "Ms. Miles," he said curtly, "we've received confirmation from the precinct. The original recording no longer exists. A fire, electrical, they claim." Desiree's stomach sank. "We still have the backup," she argued, digitally mirrored and verified, but not authenticated. The judge interrupted, his voice harder than before. "Not by chain of custody. Without the original, it is inadmissible. We have no choice." In one swift motion, the progress they'd clawed toward vanished, given the circumstances. Judge Levin concluded, "This court is forced to reinstate all charges, including the manslaughter counts." The courtroom didn't gasp this time. It deflated, and in the back row, Sergeant Karen Delacroix sat in full uniform again. Her suspension lifted with stunning speed. Her smirk was subtle, but it carved deeper than any grin. Talia, seated beside Jamal, closed her eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. That afternoon, as the headlines flipped from "Whistleblower exposes corruption" to "Key evidence destroyed in suspicious fire," The city's attention splintered. The public, once galvanized, now hesitated. Donations slowed. Hashtags stopped trending. Back at their house, still bearing the scars of vandalism, Talia sat on the porch steps holding her phone, eyes wide and empty. "They're saying we faked it, Jamal," she whispered. "That we made the whole thing up." He crouched beside her, placing a hand over hers. "I know what they're saying. But you didn't fake anything." "No," he said quietly. "But they burned the proof like it never happened, and now they're back in control." Delacroix was already back on patrol. Slater, untouched, made a public appearance at a charity gala that evening, shaking hands with donors, his uniform pressed and polished. They had played the game again and won. For now. But as Jamal looked out past the cracked window frame, he knew this wasn't over. They may have burned the truth, but ashes don't disappear. Not when you know how to stir them. And Jamal Carter had just learned how deep the fire had to go before it cleared a path. It began with a murmur. Courtroom 3C was packed again, but this time the energy had shifted. After weeks of whiplash, from hope to devastation, from rally cries to restraining orders, the public had grown fatigued. Most assumed the final hearing would be procedural routine, the last box to check before Jamal Carter disappeared behind bars for a decade or more. But Jamal didn't walk into that courtroom like a man being buried. He walked in like he'd been waiting for this day. His suit was crisp, his posture grounded. He gave a slight nod to Talia, who sat in the front row. Her hand clenched around the locket he gave her the day they got engaged. No words passed between them, but something in his eyes told her. Watch closely. Judge Levin took the bench, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Miles," he said, addressing Jamal's attorney, "do you wish to proceed with any final motions before I set sentencing?" Before Desiree could rise, Jamal stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear, calm. "With your permission, I'd like to speak." There was hesitation, then a nod. Jamal walked to the center of the courtroom, hands folded in front of him. "For the last 2 months," he began, "I've been called a criminal, a thug, a danger to this community. I've been arrested, beaten, humiliated, framed, and nearly buried alive under lies so elaborate they almost worked." A hush fell over the room. He turned, facing the judge directly. "But what most don't know is that my name is not only Jamal Carter. My full designation is Special Agent Jamal Carter, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." The air was sucked from the room. Gasps erupted. A reporter in the gallery dropped her pen. Judge Levin's eyes narrowed, leaning forward. "Repeat," that he ordered. Jamal reached into his jacket. Immediately, 2 bailiffs stepped forward, but he raised both hands slowly and pulled out a sealed folder. DOJ insignia stamped on the cover. "This is a verified, federally signed record of my assignment," he said, "filed under Title 42, Section 14141, authorizing covert investigation of systemic misconduct within law enforcement agencies." Desiree Miles was on her feet now, eyes wide. "He's telling the truth." "Your Honor, I received confirmation from the DOJ this morning under seal." The judge took the folder with trembling hands, flipping it open. Inside were sworn affidavits, surveillance logs, internal memos, photos, and 2 key transcripts verbatim, quotes from Slater and Delacroix tying them directly to the false arrests, the planted weapon, the incitement of violence at the rally, and even the destruction of evidence in the precinct fire. A pin could have dropped. Jamal's voice didn't waver. Every move they made was documented, every lie recorded. "And I waited while they tried to break me, because that's what systemic rot depends on. That we crack, that we fold." He turned slowly, eyes locking on Sergeant Karen Delacroix, seated beside Slater in the gallery. Delacroix's mouth fell open, her tan uniform suddenly ill-fitting. Raymond Slater's jaw clenched, sweat beating at his temples. "I didn't just survive their plan," Jamal said. "I studied it." From the inside, Judge Levin rose to his feet. "Bailiffs," he barked, "detain Sergeant Delacroix and Deputy Chief Slater immediately. This court will not tolerate an ounce of corruption on my bench." The crowd erupted. One woman sobbed. A man in the back stood and clapped once before sitting down again. Stunned, Talia covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face as 2 armed marshals stepped forward and cuffed Slater and Delacroix, their faces drained of color, their legacy of power reduced to disgrace. Slater shouted, "This is a setup." But Jamal didn't flinch. "It's accountability," he said. And for the first time in weeks, the city of Atlanta listened not to a man on trial, but to a man who had quietly held the power to tear down everything built on lies. The storm had broken, but Jamal Carter had walked into it with thunder in his hands. There are moments that don't echo, they detonate. As the cuffs locked around Sergeant Karen Delacroix's wrists and Deputy Chief Raymond Slater's stunned face went pale, it wasn't just a courtroom reacting. It was a city exhaling. Judge Levin stood with a rare intensity in his voice. All charges against Special Agent Jamal Carter are hereby vacated. Immediate release is ordered. The words hung in the air like thunder. In the back of courtroom 3C, someone clapped, then another. By the time the bailiffs led Slater and Delacroix out, no longer enforcers but defendants, the gallery had risen to its feet. Jamal didn't raise his fists in victory. He didn't shout or weep. He simply turned to Talia, who had buried her face in her hands. She looked up, her cheeks streaked with tears, and when their eyes met, something in her finally let go. A dam burst, not from pain but from the sheer release of survival. She ran to him. No words. Just the sound of breath of an embrace that had waited months to feel real again. That night, news broke faster than anchors could keep up. Federal sting operation exposes Atlanta police corruption. Delacroix and Slater arrested in DOJ crackdown. Jamal Carter revealed as undercover federal agent. By morning, the Department of Justice held a press conference confirming what Jamal had revealed under oath, a multi-year investigation into targeted abuse, evidence tampering, and racially motivated misconduct within regional law enforcement. More indictments were likely. Atlanta woke up to headlines it never expected and the fragile hope that maybe this time the system would finally be forced to look in the mirror. The manslaughter charge gone. The weapons possession thrown out. The inciting violence, the alleged bribery, the doctored photos, all unraveling under federal scrutiny. Jamal Carter walked out of the courthouse as a free man. But more than that, he walked out as a symbol. At the steps, a sea of reporters surged forward, cameras, flashing microphones thrust toward him. Agent Carter, do you have any statement for the city? Jamal paused. The Atlanta sky stretched wide above him, the heat pressing down like a reminder of what had been endured beneath it. He glanced at Talia, who now stood beside him. Once again, her dignity restored, her job, reinstated by a public apology and full compensation from the daycare she'd once been forced to leave. Jamal faced the cameras. This was never about just me, he said. It was about every person who's ever been silenced, framed, or made to feel like truth would never matter. It does. It always has. Then, with a small, knowing smile, and to those watching from Capitol Hill, I hope you've been paying attention, because this operation isn't finished. We're just getting started. The crowd roared. Justice Rising announced a formal partnership with the DOJ to assist with community-led oversight initiatives. Riley Mason declared a citywide summit for healing and reform. Talia returned to the classroom, her name no longer whispered in fear but spoken with pride. And Jamal. He disappeared from the spotlight for a time. No press tours, no victory laps, just quiet movement, conversations with senators, strategy, meetings with civil rights attorneys. Files transferred encrypted sent to D.C. because while Atlanta had been the first chapter, the next would be written under brighter lights in longer shadows, and somewhere behind a closed door in the nation's capital, someone was already feeling the ground tremble. Jamal Carter wasn't the story they expected. He was the reckoning they never saw coming. Jamal Carter walked into a courtroom in cuffs. He walked out with a badge. Sergeant Karen Delacroix and Deputy Chief Slater thought they were untouchable until the man they tried to bury revealed he was sent to expose them. Now they're behind bars. The DOJ has launched a full-scale investigation. And Jamal? He's not done. As Atlanta takes a breath, he's already looking toward Washington, because corruption doesn't end at the city line, and justice has a long memory. If this story gripped you, drop a comment below and tell us. When did you realize Jamal was playing a deeper game? And who else needs to be held accountable? Next, smash that like button. If you believe in exposing the truth, share this video to keep the conversation alive and subscribe so you never miss a story that dares to speak out. This isn't just entertainment. It's a reckoning. And we're just getting started.